The morning sun streamed through stained glass windows as Sarah Mitchell stood before the mirror in her wedding dress, a vision of radiant joy 40 years in the making. After decades of focusing on her career, she had finally found her perfect match. But in mere moments her dream would shatter. The church bells rang, marking the hour of her ceremony, yet her groom was nowhere to be found. As whispers rippled through the congregation, Sarah's heart raced. Then, following a commotion outside, she threw open the heavy oak doors and froze. There, at a second altar, stood her fiancé with another bride. But what Sarah didn't know was that this betrayal was just the beginning. What dark secrets lay beneath his double life? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell hadn't planned on finding love at 58. Her corner office at Mitchell & Associates spoke of different priorities. Law degrees from Yale and Harvard adorned mahogany walls, while family photos were conspicuously absent. She'd built her reputation as Chicago's most formidable corporate attorney through decades of careful choices and calculated risks. Love, she'd always maintained, was a luxury that could wait. The dating app notification had chimed during a late night. Review of merger documents. James Richardson, 61, financial advisor. His profile on Elite Singles stood out not for its flashiness, but for its understated elegance. No filtered photos or exaggerated claims, just a distinguished man in a well-cut suit, silver hair perfectly groomed, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Seeking an accomplished partner who understands that the best things in life are worth waiting for, his bio read. Sarah had smiled at that, remembering her mother's words about patience being a virtue. How many times had she dismissed such advice, too focused on the next case, the next victory? Their first message exchange was refreshingly direct. No games, no pretense, just two adults who knew exactly what they wanted. James had suggested meeting at the Art Institute, specifically to view the Edward Hopper exhibition. His paintings capture solitude so beautifully, he'd written, though I find myself ready for a different kind of evening scene. The memory of that first meeting still brought warmth to Sarah's chest. She'd found him studying nighthawks, hands clasped behind his back, lost in contemplation. He'd turned at her approach, and his smile had been exactly like his photos. Genuine, warm, reaching all the way to those kind eyes. "You must be Sarah," he'd said, voice rich and measured. "I was just thinking how Hopper would have painted." This moment. They'd spent hours discussing art, life, and the curious paths that had led them both to this point in their lives. James spoke of his work in international finance with passion, but without the arrogance she'd come to expect from men in his field. He listened intently to her stories about landmark cases, asking insightful questions that showed genuine interest rather than competitive comparison. "My wife passed away 5 years ago," he'd shared over dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. "Cancer, it teaches you that time is precious." Sarah had reached across the table then, covering his hand with hers. It felt natural, right? Like a gesture she'd been waiting decades to make. Their courtship progressed with the assured pace of those who have nothing to prove. Weekend gallery visits turned into cozy dinners at home. James's business trips, frequent but never too long, gave their time together a sweetness born of anticipation. Each reunion felt like coming home to something Sarah hadn't known she was missing. "You're different with him," her paralegal of 15 years had observed. Softer somehow, but in a good way. Sarah had brushed off the comment, but privately, she knew it was true. For the first time in her life, she was allowing herself to be more than her achievements. The proposal came 8 months later, during a weekend in Montreal. James had arranged a private viewing at the Museum of Fine Arts, recreating their first date with exquisite attention to detail. When he knelt before a Hopper painting, ring box in hand, Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Another first. "We've Both lived full lives, he'd said, voice steady but full of emotion. Now I want to live the rest of mine with you. The ring was perfect. A classic emerald-cut diamond, elegant and understated. Just like their love. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning and joy. If James seemed occasionally distracted, or if his business calls sometimes came at odd hours, Sarah attributed it to the natural stress of combining two established lives. Besides, her own schedule was packed with wedding preparations and finishing up major cases before their planned honeymoon in the south of France. Looking back, there had been signs. The way he always handled his own travel arrangements, insisting it was simpler that way. How he never quite introduced her to his business partners, explaining that they were scattered across different time zones. The times his stories about his past seemed to shift slightly in the retelling, like watercolors bleeding at the edges. But love, especially love that arrives later in life, has a way of softening hard-earned edges of skepticism. Sarah, who had built a career on detecting deception in corporate dealings, had chosen to see only what her heart wanted to see. After all, what successful person of their age didn't have complications, histories, and the occasional inconsistency in their past? All those thoughts would come later, in the bitter aftermath of discovery, but in those sweet months of engagement, Sarah Mitchell, soon to be Sarah Richardson, had finally allowed herself to believe in happily ever after. The jewelry store receipt lay forgotten in James's coat pocket, a simple oversight that Sarah discovered while sending his suits to the dry cleaner. She hadn't meant to look, but the paper had fallen out, and her eyes caught the price before she could stop herself. The amount made her pause, $40,800 for an emerald-cut diamond ring, yet something about the date nagged at her. It was from 3 weeks before he proposed, when he'd supposedly been in Singapore for work. Sarah tucked the receipt back into his pocket, dismissing the discrepancy as jet-lag confusion. After all, their life together had fallen into such a comfortable rhythm. James brought her coffee every Sunday morning, dark roast with a splash of cream, exactly how she liked it. He remembered every important court date, sending encouraging texts before major presentations. His thoughtfulness seemed to know no bounds. "He's exactly what you deserve," her sister Catherine had said during their monthly lunch. "Though I can't believe you met him online. Remember how you used to mock my Tinder dates?" They'd laughed about that, about how life had a way of humbling even the most skeptical hearts. Their evenings together had a peaceful quality that Sarah had never known she craved. James would often cook while she reviewed cases, filling her kitchen with the aromas of herbs and wine. He moved through her space with careful consideration, as though he'd always belonged there. Sometimes he'd read financial reports while she worked, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, looking every bit the distinguished businessman she'd fallen for. Yet there were moments, brief, fleeting instances, when something felt slightly off, like the time she'd mentioned wanting to surprise him at his office, and he'd quickly suggested meeting at a restaurant instead, or how his phone always went to voicemail during certain hours, which he explained as international conference calls. Investment. "Banking is all about discretion," he'd say with that warm smile that made her concerns melt away. "My clients trust me with their financial futures. I have to honor that trust." It made perfect sense, especially to Sarah, who understood client confidentiality all too well. Their wedding planning brought out a side of James that intrigued her. He took an unusual interest in the details, not just the broad strokes that most grooms concerned themselves with, but the minutiae. He had opinions about everything from the table settings to the ceremony timing. "I want it to be perfect for you," he'd say, kissing her temple softly. The guest list had been another peculiarity. James's side would be small, he'd explained, as most of his close friends were scattered across the globe. His parents had passed away years ago, and his sister, his only sibling, lived in Australia and couldn't make the journey. Sarah had offered to change the date to accommodate. His sister, but James insisted it wasn't necessary. "Sometimes I wonder if I know everything about you," Sarah had mused one evening, curled against him on her sofa. James had stiffened slightly before relaxing, his hand continuing its gentle stroke through her hair. "At our age, darling, we all have histories," he'd replied. "What matters is the future we're building together." His words were perfect, as always, but something in his tone held a note she couldn't quite place. The engagement ring caught the light as Sarah turned these thoughts over in her mind. It was beautiful, classic, exactly what she would have, chosen for herself. Just like James was exactly what she would have chosen had she crafted a perfect partner from her imagination. Perhaps that should have been the first warning. Nothing in life was ever that perfect. But Sarah, who had spent decades cultivating a razor-sharp instinct for deception in her professional life, found herself willingly blind to the small inconsistencies that occasionally rippled the surface of their relationship. After all, who would go to such lengths to create such an elaborate facade? What could anyone hope to gain from deceiving a woman who had already built her own fortune, who needed nothing from a partner but companionship and love? These questions would haunt her later, but for now, Sarah Mitchell was simply a woman in love, preparing to begin a new chapter of her life with a man who seemed to understand her completely. The fact that he understood her so perfectly would later prove to be the most suspicious detail of all. The wedding day timeline sat propped against the vintage mirror in the church's bridal suite, its elegant calligraphy mapping out every moment of what should have been Sarah's perfect day. 7:30 a.m. hair and makeup, 9:30 a.m. dress fitting, 11:10 a.m. photography, 1:00 p.m. ceremony. Each line was punctuated with James's neat additions, little notes about when he'd arrive, when he'd be dressed, when they'd first see each other at the altar. Sarah traced her finger along the timeline's gold edges, frowning at her phone. James's last text had come at 6:43 a.m. "Can't wait to see you, my love. Everything will be perfect." Something about the message felt odd. Not the words themselves, but the timing. James was usually precise, adhering to their agreed-upon schedule. Of no contact until after the ceremony, he'd been adamant about maintaining that tradition. "Sarah, honey, the hairstylist is ready," Catherine called, poking her head into the suite. "Are you all right? You look worried." "I'm fine," Sarah answered, smoothing her silk robe. "Just pre-wedding jitters, I suppose." But as she settled into the styling chair, another text arrived. "Had to handle one last business matter. Don't worry." This time, it was from an unknown number. The morning progressed with the orchestrated precision of a well-planned legal proceeding. Sarah had approached her wedding preparations with the same attention to detail she brought to her biggest cases. Every element had been carefully considered, from the vintage lace of her dress to the exact shade of ivory for the rose bouquets. Yet something felt off-kilter. The makeup artist noticed Sarah's hands trembling slightly as she applied her lipstick. The photographer commented on her distracted expression during the pre-ceremony shots. Even the wedding coordinator seemed to be checking her phone more frequently than usual. "Has anyone heard from James?" Sarah finally asked, trying to keep her voice steady. It was 11:30 a.m., and he should have arrived 30 minutes ago for his own photography session. "I'm sure he's just stuck in traffic," Catherine soothed, but Sarah caught her exchanging glances with the maid of honor. "You know how the city gets on Saturdays." Sarah reached for her phone again, scrolling through her messages. The strange texts from the unknown number had continued, everything proceeding as planned. All arrangements confirmed. Final details in place. Each message was more cryptic than the last, and none sounded like James's usual warm, personal tone. The wedding coordinator appeared at the door, her professionally calm expression slightly strained. Ms. Mitchell, there's been a slight delay with the groom's arrival, but please don't worry, we can adjust the timeline." Sarah stood, her dress rustling softly. "What kind of delay?" Have you spoken to him? Well, that's the thing. The coordinator consulted her tablet. We've been trying to reach him, but his best man says he left the hotel hours ago, said he had an errand to run before the ceremony. An errand? On their wedding day? Sarah felt a familiar sensation creeping up her spine. The same instinct that had saved her from countless bad deals and dishonest negotiations throughout her career. Something wasn't adding up. She walked to the window, watching guests arrive. In their Sunday best, each car that pulled up made her heart jump, expecting to see James's silver Mercedes. But as the minutes ticked by, that knot of uncertainty in her stomach grew tighter. The timeline on the mirror seemed to mock her now. 12:15 p.m. Final dress adjustments. 12:30 p.m. Bride's flowers arrive. 12:45 p.m. Wedding party lines up, each milestone approaching with terrifying speed, while the groom's column remained conspicuously empty. "Should we call the police?" Catherine whispered to the wedding coordinator, thinking Sarah couldn't hear. "What if something's happened to him?" Sarah turned from the window, her legal mind finally engaging despite her emotional turmoil. "Let me see his hotel room key card," she said firmly. The coordinator blinked in surprise. "The one he used this morning? You collected them from the wedding party, didn't you? It was on the timeline." The coordinator fumbled through her records. "That's odd. According to this, Mr. Richardson never checked in last night, but his best man said." Sarah didn't hear the rest. Blood rushing in her ears drowned out all other sounds as pieces began falling into place. The strange texts, the missing hotel, check-in, the perfect, almost too perfect relationship that had led to this moment. The cathedral bells began to toll, marking 15 minutes until the ceremony. Sarah Mitchell, still in her wedding dress, felt her world starting to tilt on its axis, but she had no idea that the real shock was yet to come. The church security footage would later show James arriving at 11:15 a.m., a full hour before anyone noticed something was wrong. In the grainy video, he moved with purpose, checking his watch repeatedly as he spoke with the security guard. Then, just as purposefully, he left through a side door, his garment bag still slung over his shoulder. He never looked back. But Sarah knew none of this as she stood in the vestibule, watching the minute hand tick past 1 o'clock. The organist had played through the prelude twice now, the familiar strains of Bach taking on an increasingly anxious tone. Through the heavy wooden doors, she could hear the murmur of 300 guests growing louder, more concerned. "This isn't like him," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Catherine, who hadn't left her side. "James is never late. Not for anything." She pulled out her phone again, fingers hovering over the keypad. The strange texts had stopped coming 30 minutes ago. The wedding coordinator approached, her professional composure finally cracking. "Miss Mitchell, we need to make a decision. The church has another wedding scheduled for 4 o'clock. "Another wedding?" Sarah's head snapped up. Something about those words triggered her lawyer's instinct for detail. "Here? Today?" No. The coordinator checked her tablet. "At St. Michael's across town, but we need to—" "St. Michael's?" Sarah interrupted again. That name, she'd seen it somewhere, recently. Her mind raced back through the past weeks, searching for the connection. Then she remembered the dry cleaning receipt in James's pocket. She'd noticed the address because it was in a part of town James claimed he never visited. The cathedral bells tolled again, their deep resonance seeming to echo the hollow feeling growing in Sarah's chest. The wedding coordinator was still talking, suggesting they make an announcement, ask the guests for patience. But Sarah had stopped listening. Instead, she was remembering all the tiny discrepancies that her love-struck mind had dismissed. The business calls that only came at specific times, the trips that never quite aligned with international flight schedules. The way James had been so particular about the ceremony time, insisting on 1 o'clock exactly. "My phone," she said suddenly. cutting through the coordinator's nervous chatter. "Where's my phone?" She'd put it down somewhere, distracted by the growing crisis. Catherine handed it to her, and Sarah quickly pulled up her browser history. There, the St. Michael's website she'd absent-mindedly checked weeks ago, wondering about the address on the receipt. Her fingers trembled as she navigated to their wedding calendar. Today's date, 1 o'clock ceremony, and there it was, in plain text, Richardson Palmer wedding. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Palmer, she whispered. The name meant nothing to her, and yet, "Catherine, my laptop. I need my laptop." "Your laptop." "Sarah, this isn't the time for—" "Now!" The sharpness in her voice made everyone in the vestibule jump. Catherine hurried to retrieve the computer bag Sarah had insisted on bringing, just in case, with fingers that had drafted countless legal briefs. Sarah pulled up her saved research on James. She'd done her due diligence, of course. She was a lawyer, after all. But she'd only searched for James Richardson. Now she typed Richardson Palmer into the search bar. The results loaded just as a commotion erupted outside the church doors. Voices raised in confusion, then shock. Sarah looked up from her screen, where an article about charitable fraud featuring a familiar face was just beginning to load. The heavy doors burst open. "Sarah!" It was her nephew, Thomas, face flushed from running. "There's something you need to see. Another church, St. Michael's, they're saying." But Sarah was already moving, her wedding dress rustling like autumn leaves as she strode toward the doors. She could hear Catherine calling after her, could feel the eyes of hundreds of guests on her back. But all she could focus on was the growing certainty that the man she thought she knew, the man she had agreed to marry, was about to prove himself a stranger. The wedding program trembled in Sarah's hands as she stood in the shadowed entrance of St. Michael's Church. It was identical to her own, down to the gold-embossed edges and cream-colored paper, only the name was different. Rebecca Palmer and James Richardson cordially invite you to share in their joy. The sound of organ music drifted through the carved wooden doors, the same Bach prelude she should have been walking down the aisle to at that very moment. Sarah's legal mind catalogued the details with mechanical precision. The identical flower arrangements, the same ceremony time, even the same scripture readings listed in the program. "Sarah, wait!" Catherine whispered urgently behind her. "Let me call the police. You don't need to—" But Sarah was already pushing open the heavy door. The familiar strains of wedding music stuttered to a stop as heads turned toward the unexpected interruption. There, at the altar, stood James, her James, holding hands with a woman who looked to be in her mid-50s, elegant in a wedding gown that could have been cut from the same pattern as Sarah's. The other bride's face showed the same dawning horror that Sarah felt in her own heart. James, however, maintained his composure for a split second too long, that practiced perfect smile freezing on his face before cracking into something else entirely. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence, "you weren't supposed to be here." The calm calculation in his tone sent chills down her spine. This wasn't the voice of a man caught in a mistake. This was the voice of someone whose carefully laid plans had gone awry. Rebecca Palmer, the other bride, pulled her hands from James's grasp. "What's happening?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "James, who is this woman?" "I'm his fiancé," Sarah said, her courtroom voice cutting through the murmurs of the confused congregation. "Or at least I was supposed to be marrying him at St. Patrick's Cathedral right now." The color drained from Rebecca's face as she turned back to James. What is she talking about? But James was already backing away from both women, his eyes darting between them and toward the side door. The same practiced escape route he'd used at Sarah's church, she realized. How many times had he rehearsed this? "Ladies," he began, hands raised in a placating gesture that seemed grotesque in its familiarity, "I can explain everything." "Explain?" Rebecca's voice rose. "Explain how you're supposedly marrying two women at the same time?" Sarah stepped forward, her wedding dress whispering against the marble floor. "I don't think this is about marriage at all," she said, her mind racing ahead to connect the dots. The timing, the identical arrangements, the careful planning. This was never about love. James's face changed then, the mask of warmth and sincerity falling away completely. For the first time, Sarah saw him clearly. Not the distinguished businessman she'd fallen in love with, but something altogether more calculated. "You weren't supposed to figure it out," he said softly, almost appreciatively. "Not yet. Not until after the honeymoon deposits were secured and the joint accounts were established." He smiled, and this time it was sharp, professional. "You have to admire the efficiency of a double ceremony, though. 2 weddings, same day, different churches. Maximum return on investment." The gasps from both congregations seemed to break the spell. James turned suddenly, making for the side door, but Sarah's voice stopped him cold. "The police are already on their way," she lied, silently praying that Catherine had indeed made the call. "And I've got quite a story to tell them about those offshore accounts you've been so carefully hiding." She was bluffing. She hadn't found any proof of financial misconduct yet, but 20 years of corporate law had taught her to recognize guilt when she saw it. The slight stiffening of James's shoulders told her she'd hit her mark. As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance, but Sarah barely heard them over the blood rushing in her ears. She watched as the man she'd nearly married calculated his odds and made his choice. He slipped through the side door and disappeared, leaving behind 2 devastated brides and 2 stunned congregations. But what he didn't know was that he'd also left behind a trail of evidence. And he was about to learn, the hard way, what happened when you underestimated a corporate lawyer with a broken heart. The marriage license applications lay side by side on the polished conference table in Sarah's law office. 2 identical forms, filled out in James's precise handwriting, filed in different counties to avoid detection. The only differences were the brides' names and the churches listed for the ceremonies. "He used the same middle initial and birth date on both forms," Sarah noted, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she compared the documents. "That's remarkably careless for someone so meticulous." She looked up at Rebecca Palmer, who sat across the table, still wearing her wedding dress like Sarah. They'd come straight from the churches, both refusing to let James's deception rob them of their dignity by sending them running home to change. Rebecca picked up one of the forms with trembling hands. "I don't understand. I'm a financial advisor myself. I did my due diligence. His credentials checked out. His references were impeccable. Because he gave us each a slightly different version of himself," Sarah replied, pulling out a folder. "To me, he was James Richardson, international investment banker. To you, James Richardson Palmer, private wealth manager," Rebecca finished, realization dawning on her face. "He dropped the Palmer when he was with you." Sarah nodded, spreading out more documents. 2 different business cards, 2 different office addresses. "I'm willing to bet neither of them is real." She paused, studying the woman across from her. Rebecca was elegant, accomplished, so similar to Sarah herself that it was almost unnerving. "Tell me about how you met him." "Elite singles," Rebecca said, a bitter laugh escaping her. "He said he was looking for someone who understood the demands of a financial career, someone mature enough to appreciate—" She trailed off, color rising. "In her cheeks, a later-in-life love story," Sarah finished softly. "He said the same to me." Catherine entered the office with fresh coffee, her face etched with concern. "The police are still looking for him, but they say he's probably long gone. They found his car abandoned at O'Hare." Sarah wasn't surprised. A man capable of orchestrating simultaneous weddings would have his escape route well planned. She turned back to the documents, her trial lawyer's mind cataloguing each piece of evidence. "When did he propose to you?" she asked Rebecca. 3 months ago during a weekend in Toronto, at the Art Museum." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "Let me guess. In front of a Hopper painting." Rebecca's eyes widened. How did you? Because that's exactly how he proposed to me, except it was in Montreal. Sarah pulled out her phone, finding the photo of her engagement ring. Emerald-cut diamond? Rebecca wordlessly held up her left hand, displaying an identical ring. He said it was his grandmother's design. He told me the same story. Sarah leaned back, her mind racing. 2 rings, 2 proposals, 2 weddings, all meticulously planned and executed. This isn't his first time, Rebecca. No one gets this. Good at deception on their first try. The joint accounts, Rebecca said suddenly, pulling out her own phone. He insisted on setting them up last week. Said it would be easier to handle the honeymoon expenses that way. Same here. Sarah's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard. Did he ask you to transfer any funds yet? No, but he had me add him as a signatory. The paperwork was supposed to be processed today, right after the wedding. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Because banks don't process changes on Sundays. He knew we wouldn't be able to stop any transfers until Monday morning. She looked up at Rebecca. How much did you authorize? 200,000, Rebecca whispered, for our supposed villa in Tuscany. 300,000 in my case, for a chateau in Provence. Sarah's jaw tightened. $500,000 total, probably scheduled to transfer automatically as soon as the banks opened Monday morning. Catherine, who had been listening silently, spoke up. But why 2 weddings on the same day? Why take that risk? Because he needed both transfers to happen simultaneously, Sarah realized. If either of us had tried to access our accounts over the weekend and found unauthorized activity, we could have stopped both transfers, Rebecca finished. He needed everything to process at once before either of us could raise the alarm. Sarah stood, pacing the office as she had done before countless trials. The question is, how many other women has he done this to? These documents show a pattern, a professional con man who targets successful women our age. He knows we're established, careful with our money, unlikely to rush into marriage without due diligence, but also likely to have substantial assets, Rebecca added, her financial advisor's mind engaging, and possibly more trusting of a man who seems to understand the unique challenges of finding love later in life. Sarah stopped pacing, turning to face Rebecca with newfound determination. Well, he picked the wrong women this time. Between your financial expertise and my legal experience, we're going to find him, Rebecca finished, steel entering her voice. The collection of business cards spread across Sarah's desk told a story of calculated deception. Each one featured a different variation of James's name, a different title, a different company, but all shared the same sophisticated design and air of legitimacy. Richardson Global Investments, Palmer Wealth Management, Richardson and Associates Financial Services. Each card was perfect, down to the embossed lettering and heavyweight card stock. Look at this, Rebecca said, examining one under a magnifying glass she'd brought from her office. The phone numbers are all routed through different virtual services. Every call would have gone to the same phone, but we'd each see a different number calling us back. Sarah nodded, adding another yellow sticky note to the evidence board she'd assembled on her office wall. 3 days had passed since their almost weddings, and the picture emerging was more complex than either of them had imagined. The business registrations are even more interesting, Sarah said, pulling up documents on her dual monitors. Each company was incorporated in a different state, using slightly different versions of his name. The paperwork is flawless, registered. Agents, tax ID numbers, corporate seals. He even filed annual reports. But no actual business activity, Rebecca added, her financial expertise proving invaluable. I've checked every trading platform and regulatory filing. None of these companies has ever executed a single legitimate transaction. Sarah stood up from her desk, stretching muscles stiff from hours of research. The sun had set hours ago, but neither woman had suggested stopping. Their shared sense of purpose and shared humiliation drove them forward. What I don't understand, Sarah mused, studying the evidence board, is why he needed such an elaborate setup. Why not just run a simple romance scam? Why go through with actual wedding ceremonies? Rebecca moved to stand beside her, both women still wearing their office clothes from their respective returns to work that morning. They'd each taken only one day off to deal with the immediate aftermath of James's deception. Because he's not just after quick cash, Rebecca replied, gesturing to a stack of financial documents. Look at the accounts he set up. Joint checking, joint savings, investment portfolios, retirement accounts. He was positioning himself for long-term access to our assets. And wedding vows create legal entanglements that would have made it harder for us to contest his access, Sarah added, her legal mind connecting the dots. Plus, the social aspect. Once you're married, people don't question when couples combine their finances. Sarah picked up another business card, this one claiming James was a senior partner at Richardson International Banking. He must have a master list somewhere, some way of keeping track of all these identities and accounts, unless... Rebecca paused, something occurring to her. Sarah, what exactly did he tell you about his past? His family, parents deceased, one sister in Australia, wife died of cancer 5 years ago. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw where Rebecca was going. Let me guess. In your version, it was parents killed in a car accident, brother in New Zealand, and a wife lost to heart disease 6 years ago. Rebecca nodded grimly. He kept the stories similar enough that he wouldn't slip up on the basic facts, but different enough that we'd never find any real records to check. Sarah turned back to her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. I've got subpoenas out to every major bank in the Chicago area. If he's done this before... He has, Rebecca interrupted, pulling out her tablet. Look what I found buried. In the SEC's database. She pulled up a series of complaints filed over the past decade. Different names, different cities, but the pattern was unmistakable. Wealthy professional women, whirlwind romances, elaborate wedding ceremonies, and sophisticated financial fraud. He's been perfecting this scheme for years, Sarah breathed, scanning the complaints. But he's never been caught because no one made the connection between cases, Rebecca finished. Each victim thought she was alone, too embarrassed to pursue it fully, and by using different names in different jurisdictions. He stayed under the radar, Sarah concluded. She studied the evidence board again, seeing it with new eyes. But he made a mistake this time. He got greedy, tried to pull off 2 weddings at once, and he didn't count on his victims comparing notes, Rebecca added with grim satisfaction, or having the combined expertise to unravel his scheme. Sarah's phone buzzed, another alert from her banking contacts. The subpoenas are starting to come back, she said, scanning the message. Multiple accounts, multiple cities, and look at this pattern of transfers. They bent over the phone together, 2 accomplished women who'd been deceived by the same man, now united in their determination to expose him. What they didn't know yet was that they had only scratched the surface of James's deception, and that their investigation was about to uncover something far more dangerous than a simple con man. The archived newspaper article from the Seattle Times filled Sarah's screen. Prominent judge left at altar, life savings missing. Below it, a photo showed a distinguished woman in her 60s standing outside a courthouse, her face lined with the same mixture of humiliation and anger that Sarah recognized from her own mirror. Patricia Winters, family court judge, Sarah read aloud to Rebecca, who was conferencing in from her office. Engaged to a James Richardson Blackwood in 2022. He disappeared the morning of their wedding, along with nearly $1 million from their joint accounts. The timing matches a gap in his Chicago activities, Rebecca noted, the sound of her keyboard clicking in the background. And look at this one from Boston Globe's archives. Investment banker vanishes before wedding, leaving questions and empty accounts. Sarah added both articles to her digital evidence board, which now sprawled across 3 monitors. 2 weeks. of digging had uncovered a pattern spanning 5 years and 7 states. Each case featured the same methodology: successful professional women over 50, whirlwind romances, elaborate wedding preparations, and sophisticated financial fraud. "But here's what's interesting," Sarah said, pulling up another document. "In each case, the banks eventually covered the losses, claiming technical errors in their security protocols. The victims got their money back, but only after signing non-disclosure agreements, which is why none of these cases connected until now," Rebecca finished. "The banks buried them to avoid admitting their systems were compromised. But how did he manage to override their security measures every single time?" Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. "Hold on, something's coming through." She quickly read the message, her expression darkening. "Rebecca, can you come to my office? Now. This isn't something we should discuss over the phone." 30 minutes later, Rebecca stood beside Sarah, both women, staring at a new set of documents spread across the conference table. "It's not just James," Sarah said quietly. "Look at these case files. Different names, different cities, but identical methods. It's a network." The FBI files detailed similar cases across the country. Professional women targeted through upscale dating sites, con men with impeccable false credentials, weddings planned and abandoned, sophisticated financial fraud that somehow bypassed every security measure. "They're working together," Rebecca realized, picking up a photo of another suspect, sharing information, techniques, even identities. That's why the business cards and documents are always perfect. They're not being created by one person. "And that's not all," Sarah added, pulling up a global banking alert. "These transactions, they're not just disappearing into offshore accounts. They're being laundered through a network of seemingly legitimate investment firms. Each victim's money gets split into hundreds of tiny transactions, bounced through dozens of countries, then reassembled in untraceable cryptocurrency." Rebecca sat down heavily, her professional composure cracking slightly. "We're not dealing with a con man. We're dealing with an international criminal organization, one that specifically targets women like us," Sarah confirmed. "Successful, established, intelligent women who've spent their lives building careers and wealth. Women who—" She paused, something occurring to her. "Women who— what?" "Women who would be too embarrassed to make a public fuss," Sarah finished. Slowly. "They counted on our pride, our professional reputations. How many victims just quietly took the insurance payout and tried to forget it ever happened?" Rebecca's phone chimed, another alert from their ongoing investigation. "Sarah, look at this. I've been running background checks on James's supposed business associates, the ones he occasionally mentioned but never introduced us to." She handed over her tablet, showing a series of surveillance photos. Different men, different cities, but all fitting the same profile. Distinguished, well-dressed, age-appropriate, and all captured on camera meeting with known members of international crime syndicates. "They're recruits," Sarah breathed, "or handlers, the charming, sophisticated front men for a much larger operation." "And James is just one of many," Rebecca added, which means he's still out there," Sarah finished grimly. "And so are all the others, targeting more women as we speak." She stood up, moving to her evidence board with renewed purpose. "But they made a mistake with us. They didn't count on 2 victims comparing notes. They didn't expect a corporate lawyer and a financial advisor to put the pieces together. The question is," Rebecca said quietly, "now that we know what we're dealing with, what do we do about it?" Sarah turned back to her, a familiar pre-trial gleam in her eye. "We do what we do best. We build a case, and this time we're not just going after James. We're going after the entire organization." What neither woman realized yet was that their investigation had already triggered alerts in dark corners of the internet, and that the hunters were about to become the hunted. The bank statements covered an entire wall of Sarah's office, connected by red strings that tracked the movement of millions of dollars across continents. Rebecca stood before the display, her financial analyst's mind piecing together the complex web of transactions. "Look at this pattern," she said, tracing a string from Chicago to Singapore. Every transfer is just under the reporting threshold, split into exactly 37 smaller transactions, each one routed through a different intermediary bank. She shook her head in reluctant admiration. "It's brilliant, in a terrible way." Sarah looked up from her computer, where she'd been analyzing data from their growing network of victims. "They're using AI algorithms to optimize the transfers. Each path is unique, never repeating the same route twice. That's why the bank's fraud detection systems never caught on." The late October sun had long since set outside her corner office windows, but neither woman had suggested calling it a day. They'd been working like this for weeks now, combining their expertise to unravel what was proving to be an elaborate international scheme. "Here's what I don't understand," Sarah continued, pulling up another spreadsheet. "The total amount stolen is massive, over $50 million from the victims we've identified so far, but the money doesn't stay in any account for more than 17 minutes before moving again." Rebecca moved to look over her shoulder, frowning at the numbers. "It's like they're not just hiding the money, they're—" She paused, something clicking in her mind. "They're cleaning it. Our money isn't the target, it's the soap." "What do you mean?" "These accounts, they're not the end point. They're just part of a larger money laundering operation." Rebecca quickly pulled up her own laptop. "See these destination accounts? They're receiving huge transfers from other sources at exactly the same time our money passes through." Sarah leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "So the stolen wedding funds get mixed with dirty money from other sources. By the time it all comes out the other end, it's impossible to trace what came from where," Rebecca finished. "The wedding scams are just one part of a much bigger operation. They're using our legitimate funds to help clean money from drug trafficking, arms dealing." A sharp crack interrupted her. Both women instinctively ducked as the window behind them shattered, glass spraying across Sarah's desk. A small, dark object clattered across the floor. "Get down!" Sarah shouted, pulling Rebecca behind the heavy oak conference table. Years of high-stakes corporate law had taught her to prepare for the worst. She reached under the table and pulled out a small emergency kit. The object, a small metal sphere, began emitting a thick, acrid smoke. Sarah quickly pulled 2 filtration masks from the kit, handing one to Rebecca. "Breathe through this. Stay low." Through the smoke, they could hear heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. Sarah's finger hovered over the panic button on her phone, but Rebecca grabbed her wrist. "Wait," she whispered. "If they wanted us dead, they wouldn't have used smoke." As if in response, a voice called out through the haze. "Consider this a professional courtesy," a man said, his tone coldly efficient. "Stop digging. The next warning won't be so gentle." By the time the smoke cleared and security reached their floor, the intruders were long gone, but they'd left something behind, a USB drive sitting prominently on Sarah's desk, surrounded by broken glass. "Don't touch it," Sarah warned as Rebecca reached for it. "Let me call my contact at the FBI's cyber division first." She paused, studying her friend's face. "You okay?" Rebecca nodded, though her hands shook slightly as she straightened her jacket. "They're trying to scare us off. That means we're getting close to something important." Sarah's phone buzzed, a secure message from her FBI contact. "They've had other reports," she said grimly, reading the text. "Similar incidents at law firms and financial offices across the country. Always after someone starts asking too many questions about certain financial transactions. So what do we do now?" Rebecca asked, looking at their wall of evidence now dusted with broken glass. "They clearly have resources, connections. We might be in over our heads." Sarah walked to the window, glass crunching under her shoes as she looked out at the Chicago skyline. After a moment, she turned back to Rebecca, her expression determined. We do what they don't expect. We go public, all of it, the wedding scams, the money laundering, the intimidation tactics. They'll try to stop us, Rebecca warned. Oh, I'm counting on it, Sarah replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. Because this time we'll be ready, and we're not the only ones they've underestimated. She reached for her phone again, scrolling through her contacts. Remember Judge Patricia Winters from Seattle? I think it's time we organized a little reunion of James's almost brides. Let's see how their operation handles a dozen angry professional, women with resources, connections, and nothing left to lose. The encrypted USB drive's contents glowed on the secure terminal screen in the FBI's Chicago field office. Sarah and Rebecca sat with Special Agent Diana Chen, watching as layers of financial data unfurled before them. It wasn't just transaction records. It was a complete operational blueprint of an international criminal enterprise. They wanted us to see this, Agent Chen said, her expression grim. This drive isn't a threat, it's a boast. They're showing us exactly how sophisticated their operation is. Sarah leaned forward, studying a particularly complex flowchart. Look at these dating site algorithms. They're not just using these platforms. They've infiltrated them, modified the matching systems to specifically target women with certain financial profiles. And not just any women, Rebecca added, pulling up her own analysis on her laptop. In the past week, I've spoken with 15 other victims. Every single one of us fits the same pattern. Successful professional women over 50, no children, substantial assets, and, most importantly, positions of influence in banking, law, or government. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They're not just after money, Sarah said slowly. They're after access. Each victim had connections or knowledge they could exploit. Agent Chen nodded. Judge Winters had access to sealed family court records, perfect for identity theft. The bank executive in Boston could approve large transfers without additional oversight. The hospital administrator in Atlanta had access to medical billing systems. Systems they could use to launder money, Rebecca finished. The wedding scams were just the beginning. Once they had compromised these women through marriage, they'd have insider access to dozens of major institutions, Sarah concluded. She turned to another screen, showing a map of reported incidents. But why expose their own operation? Why give us this USB drive? Because they don't think we can stop them, Agent Chen replied. Look at this timestamp. This data is 3 months old. They're showing us their past operations because they've already evolved into something new. Rebecca's phone buzzed. Another message from their growing network of victims. Sarah, look at this. Judge Winters found something in her old case files. 3 years ago, she handled a divorce case involving one of James's known associates. The wife disappeared the day before she was supposed to testify about her husband's financial dealings. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They're escalating, moving beyond fraud into something more dangerous. We've got a bigger problem, Agent Chen interrupted, pointing to her screen. These algorithms they're using to target victims. They're actively running right now. I'm seeing dozens of potential new targets being identified across multiple dating platforms. Sarah stood up, pacing the small, secure room. So we've got an international criminal organization using AI-driven dating sites to target professional women, a sophisticated money laundering operation using wedding scams as cover, and now evidence of violence against those who threaten to expose them. Don't forget the corrupt banking protocols, Rebecca added. They've somehow compromised the security systems of major financial institutions. That kind of access requires inside help at the highest levels. Agent Chen's computer chimed with an urgent alert. Speaking of inside help, we just got a hit on one of James's known aliases. A James Richardson Palmer just received security clearance for a consulting position at the Federal Reserve. They're infiltrating government institutions now, Sarah said, her legal mind already racing ahead. This goes way beyond romance scams. They're building a network of compromised individuals in positions of power. Rebecca pulled up another file on her laptop. The pattern of victims supports that theory. In the past year alone, they've targeted 3 judges, 4 bank executives, 2 hospital administrators, and a senior partner at one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the country. And those are just the ones we know about, Agent Chen added grimly. For every victim who's come. You forward, there are probably dozens more who stayed quiet, Sarah finished. She turned to the evidence wall, where photos of James and his known associates stared back at them. We need to move fast. Every day we wait. More women are being targeted, Rebecca said. She stood up, joining Sarah at the wall. But we have something they don't expect. What's that? A network of our own, professional women who've spent decades building careers, connections, and influence. Women who are done being victims. Rebecca's voice hardened with determination. Women who are ready to fight back. Sarah nodded slowly, an idea forming. Agent Chen, how quickly can you get Judge Winters and the others to Chicago? Why? Because it's time to turn their own tactics against them. They think they're targeting isolated, vulnerable women. Sarah's eyes gleamed with purpose. Let's show them what happens when those women work together. What they didn't know was that their own network had already been infiltrated, and that one of the women they trusted was about to betray them. The threatening letters arrived simultaneously at Sarah's and Rebecca's offices, elegant, cream-colored envelopes that could have been wedding invitations. Inside each, a single sheet of expensive stationery carried the same message. You've gathered quite a sisterhood. Shame if anything happened to them. Sarah studied the letter through an evidence bag in her office, where she'd gathered with Rebecca and Judge Patricia Winters. The judge had flown in from Seattle that morning, her usual judicial composure marked by lines of worry. They're watching us, Patricia said, holding up her own identical letter. They know about our meeting today, about all of it. Of course they do, Rebecca replied, her financial analyst's mind working. Think about their resources, AI-driven, surveillance, compromised security systems, corrupt officials. We have to assume they can access everything. Sarah walked to her office window, newly reinforced with bulletproof glass after the smoke bomb incident. 3 stories below, she could see the private security team she'd hired patrolling the perimeter. They're escalating their threats because we're getting closer. The question is, closer to what? I might have an answer to that, Patricia said, pulling out her tablet. Remember that divorce case I mentioned, the one where the wife disappeared? She pulled up a sealed court document. I've been digging through my old files. The wife, Elizabeth. Chen wasn't just talking about financial fraud. She had evidence of something called Project Alter. Sarah and Rebecca exchanged glances. Chen? Sarah asked. Any relation to Agent Diana Chen? Her sister, Patricia confirmed grimly. Diana's been looking for her for 3 years, and now we know why Elizabeth disappeared. She wasn't just threatening to expose financial crimes. She was about to reveal their entire operation. Rebecca moved to the evidence wall, where dozens of photos and documents tracked their investigation. Project Alter. The name can't be a coincidence. Everything they do revolves around weddings, marriage, relationships. Because marriage gives them legal access, Sarah said, understanding dawning. Once they marry their targets, they have legal rights to assets, privilege in court proceedings, access to confidential information, and social cover, Patricia added. No one questions a husband having access to his wife's accounts, offices, or files. It's the perfect infiltration strategy. A sharp knock at the door made them all jump. Catherine entered, carrying a thick, manila envelope. This just came by courier for Rebecca. They insisted on personal delivery. Rebecca took the envelope carefully, checking it for tampering before opening it. Inside were photos, surveillance shots of every member of their growing network. Judges, executives, administrators, all photographed without their knowledge. And with each photo, a detailed dossier of their vulnerabilities, children's schools, elderly parents' care facilities, financial weaknesses that could be exploited. "They're not just threatening us anymore," Rebecca said quietly. "They're threatening everyone we care about." Sarah took the photos, her jaw tightening. "This is what they do. They isolate their targets, make them feel vulnerable and alone. That's why their romance scams work. They prey on successful women who've sacrificed personal connections for their careers." "But we're not alone anymore," Patricia said firmly. "There are 37 of us now, all with resources, connections, and nothing left to lose. They want to threaten our loved ones. Let's show them how mama bears really fight." Sarah's phone buzzed, a secure message from Agent Chen. Her face paled as she read it. "We have another problem. That Federal Reserve position James was applying for. He got it. He starts next week with full security clearance." "They're moving faster than we thought," Rebecca said. "If they get someone inside the Federal Reserve, they could manipulate monetary policy, access confidential banking data, create financial chaos," Patricia finished. "And that's just the beginning. How many other institutions have they already infiltrated?" Sarah walked to her desk, pulling out a sealed envelope she'd prepared days ago. "Then we move faster too. This is everything we've gathered. Evidence of fraud, money laundering, corruption, and now attempted intimidation. I've prepared injunctions for every federal court district in the country." "They'll try to bury it," Patricia warned. "They have judges in their pocket, prosecutors they can pressure." "That's why we're not just going to the courts," Sarah replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "Rebecca, remember that reporter you mentioned? The one who covers white-collar crime?" Rebecca nodded slowly, understanding. "A coordinated media blast. Courts, press, social media all at once. Too big to bury. And too public to hide," Patricia added, her judicial experience showing. "If we time this right, we can expose their entire operation before they can react," Sarah finished. "But we have to move now. Tonight." What they didn't know was that their urgency played directly into the organization's hands, and that the trap they thought they were setting was actually closing around them. The surveillance photos spread across Sarah's desk told a story more chilling than any threat letter. They showed James, not in some distant location, but here in Chicago, outside her office, following her to court, watching her home. The timestamps revealed he'd been tracking her movements for days, always just out of sight. "He's getting sloppy," Rebecca said, studying the images Agent Chen had rushed over. Or he wants us to know he's watching," Sarah finished, her voice tight. The photos showed James in his familiar expensive suits, silver hair immaculate as ever. But his expression in these candid shots was nothing like the warm smile they'd fallen for. His eyes were cold, calculating, the real man behind the mask. "The media blast is set for midnight," Patricia said, hanging up her phone. She'd been coordinating with their network of victims from Sarah's office, now transformed into a command center. 37 women, 37 stories, all breaking at once across different outlets. Sarah nodded, checking her watch. 10:45 p.m. "Everything's prepared. All the evidence, all the testimonies, ready to go," Rebecca confirmed, gesturing to her laptop. "I've got financial records proving the fraud pattern, Patricia has the sealed court documents, and Agent Chen is standing by with the FBI's findings." Sarah's phone buzzed, another message from their growing network, but something about this one made her pause. Wait, something's wrong. She pulled up the group chat where they'd been coordinating. "Who added a new number to our secure channel?" Rebecca leaned over to look, her face suddenly draining of color. "That's not a new number, that's—" She grabbed her own phone, scrolling frantically. "Sarah, when did Margaret join our group?" "Margaret Reynolds, the bank executive from Boston." Sarah thought back. 2 weeks ago. Patricia vouched for her." "No," Patricia said slowly, realization dawning. "I never vouched for anyone named Margaret. I thought you brought her in, Sarah." The three women stared at each other as the implications sank in. Sarah rushed to her evidence wall, pulling down Margaret's photo and documents. Everything she provided, everything she claimed about being one of James's victims, could be fabricated, Rebecca finished grimly. We were so eager to build our network, to find other victims, that we didn't verify her story as carefully as we should have, Sarah said. She began rapidly typing on her laptop, digging into Margaret's background. How much does she know? How much did we share with her? Everything, Patricia whispered. She's been on every call, seen every document, knows every name in our network. Sarah's laptop pinged with search results. Margaret Reynolds doesn't exist, at least not the one we know. The real Margaret Reynolds died 5 years ago. Then who have we been working with? Rebecca demanded. The answer came in the form of a sharp click, the sound of Sarah's office door locking automatically. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lights cast an eerie glow as Sarah's supposedly secure computer system began systematically shutting down. They're not just watching us, Sarah realized, grabbing her phone only to find it had no signal. They're inside our systems, inside this building. Through the frosted glass walls of her office, they could see figures moving in the darkened corridor. Multiple figures approaching with military precision. The photos, Rebecca said suddenly, they weren't showing us that James was watching. They were distracting us from who was really infiltrating our operation. A familiar voice came through Sarah's office intercom, but not James's voice. I have to admit, ladies, you put up quite a fight. It was Margaret, her Boston accent, now replaced by something colder, more professional. Most of our targets give up after the first warning, but you forced us to accelerate our timeline. Sarah moved to her desk, hitting the panic button that would alert building security. Nothing happened. Don't bother, Margaret's voice continued. We control every system in this building now. Amazing what you can do with the right access codes. Access codes that, I might add, you all worked so hard to gather for us. We were never the target, Sarah said, understanding finally dawning. This whole thing, James, the weddings, the threats, it was all to push us into forming this network. Give the lawyer a prize, Margaret replied. We needed access to judicial systems, banking protocols, government databases. We could have spent years infiltrating each institution individually, or you could let us do the work for you, Patricia finished bitterly. Gathering influential women, sharing information, building trust, creating our own vulnerability, Rebecca added, watching the figures draw closer to their door. The handle of Sarah's office door began to turn. But Sarah wasn't looking at it. She was looking at the private security team on the street below, the team that was now moving into the building instead of guarding it. Ladies, she said quietly to Rebecca and Patricia, I hope you remember your self-defense classes, because this is about to get very physical. Sarah's legal brief lay open on her desk, its carefully crafted paragraphs now serving a purpose far different from its intended court filing. As the door handle turned, she caught Rebecca's eye and nodded toward the heavy document. You know what's funny, Margaret? Sarah said loudly, buying seconds as Rebecca silently moved into position. For people who did so much research on us, you missed something important. And what's that? Margaret's voice crackled through the intercom. Professional women our age? We grew up fighting. Sarah grabbed her crystal paperweight. And we never stopped. The door burst open. The first man through caught Rebecca's legal brief, full in the face, 500 pages of corporate law, temporarily blinding him. Sarah's paperweight found its mark on a second intruder's temple. Patricia, proving that judges could do more than bang gavels, executed a perfect tennis serve with Sarah's brass desk lamp. The back stairs, Sarah shouted, grabbing her external hard drive as they bolted through the confusion. Behind them, Margaret was yelling orders, her practiced sophistication replaced by raw fury. They hit the stairwell running, Rebecca in the lead. They'll have the ground floor covered, she called back. Parking garage, Sarah countered. Level 3. I've got a car they don't know about. 2 decades of corporate litigation had taught her to always have a backup plan. And a backup, a vehicle. They were halfway down when the stairwell door above them slammed open. Footsteps thundered in pursuit. Patricia, bringing up the rear, grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall. "Keep going," she ordered. "I've got an idea." The former judge waited until their pursuers rounded the corner, then emptied the extinguisher up the stairs. Cursing and coughing followed as the chemical powder filled the narrow space. They burst into the parking garage with Patricia catching. Up, all 3 running on adrenaline and decades of professional survival instincts. Sarah led them to an unmarked sedan, deliberately ordinary. "They've got someone in the security booth," Rebecca warned, spotting movement by the exit. "They're not the only ones who can hack systems," Sarah replied grimly. She pulled out her phone. Dead from the office blackout but now rebooting. A few quick taps, and the garage's fire alarm blared to life. Sprinklers activated, emergency lights flashed, and the security gates automatically raised. Standard. A fire protocol. As they peeled out of the garage, Sarah glanced in her rearview mirror to see Margaret emerging from the stairwell, her expensive suit now covered in fire extinguisher residue. The look of cold fury on her face made it clear this was no longer just business. "Where are we going?" Patricia asked from the back seat, keeping low. "Somewhere they won't expect," Sarah answered, taking a series of random turns to shake any tail. "Remember what Margaret said about us gathering information for them?" Rebecca nodded, understanding dawning. "We didn't just gather information, we created a network." "Exactly." Sarah pulled onto Lakeshore Drive, heading north. 37 professional women, all with resources, connections, and now a very personal reason to fight back. Patricia. Finished. Sarah's phone, now fully rebooted, lit up with encrypted messages, their real network, the one Margaret didn't know about. While they were watching us build one network, we were quietly building another, Rebecca said, pulling out her own backup phone. "How many are ready?" Sarah quickly scanned the messages. 28 confirmed. Each one has activated their part of the contingency plan. Patricia leaned forward. "You planned for this? For being compromised?" "Rule 1 of corporate law," Sarah replied, taking another careful turn. "Always assume your opponent knows your strategy, so you feed them what you want them to see, while preparing what you don't want them to know," Rebecca finished. She held up her phone, showing a cascade of incoming alerts. "It's starting. Judge Martinez just signed the sealed warrants in California. Dr. Wong is implementing the hospital system lockdown in Atlanta. The Singapore financial authorities are freezing the accounts we identified." "And Agent Chen?" Patricia asked. "Standing by with FBI tactical teams at 7 different locations," Sarah confirmed. "The evidence we shared with Margaret, all carefully selected, just enough truth to be convincing. But missing the key pieces they'd need to stop what's coming," Rebecca added, with grim satisfaction. Sarah turned onto a quiet suburban street, approaching a modest house with a well-kept garden. "We're not just 37 victims anymore. We're federal judges, bank executives, hospital administrators, corporate lawyers, and financial analysts. And we're done being hunted." She pulled into the garage, which closed automatically behind them. Inside, they could see the soft glow of computer screens and the familiar faces of other women, their real network, gathered and ready. "Welcome to the resistance, ladies," Sarah said, leading them inside. "Now let's show them how professional women really wage war." The counterattack was about to begin, and Margaret was about to learn why underestimating women like them had been the organization's fatal mistake. The operation blueprint glowed on screens around the suburban home's converted basement, showing a complex web of coordinated actions across multiple cities. Dr. Helen Wong's elegant handwriting filled the margins with timing notations, each step precisely calculated. "Margaret thinks she knows our plan," Sarah said, addressing the dozen women gathered around the tactical display. More faces watched via secure video feed, each representing a node in their true network. She believes we're planning a simultaneous media blast at midnight, which is exactly what we wanted her to think, Rebecca added, pulling up another screen. While they're scrambling to shut down news outlets and social media, we're hitting their infrastructure directly, Agent Chen finished. She'd arrived minutes earlier through the neighbor's connecting garage, another piece of their hidden network. My sister's notes on Project Alter weren't just about money laundering. They revealed the organization's entire command and control structure. Judge Martinez, joining via secure link from California, spoke up. The wedding scams were never about the money they could steal from us. They were about creating a legitimate paper trail for their larger operation. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. Every marriage license, every joint bank account, every shared property deed, they're all legal shortcuts, ways to move money, access restricted systems, create seemingly legitimate business relationships. Rebecca took over, highlighting sections of their display. They target women in specific positions because each of us has access to a piece of their puzzle. Banking systems, legal documents, medical records, government databases. And now we're going to use that same access against them, Dr. Wong said, her hospital administrator's precision evident in the battle plan. Each of us has prepared a tactical insertion point. When we move together. Sarah nodded, checking the time. 11:15 p.m. Margaret thinks she's won, that by compromising our network, she's stopped our exposure of their romance scams. She has no idea we've spent weeks mapping their entire organization. Thanks to their own surveillance, Patricia added with grim satisfaction. While they were watching us gather evidence about the wedding scams, we were following their watchers. Agent Chen confirmed. Every time they moved against one of us, they revealed another piece of their network, another safe house, another front company, another compromised system. Sarah moved to the central screen, bringing up their master timeline. In 45 minutes, they expect us to launch a media attack. Instead, here's what's really happening. She began highlighting targets across the map. 11:30 p.m. Judge Martinez's sealed warrants activate, freezing not just their known accounts, but every account linked through their marriage fraud network. 11:35 p.m. Dr. Wong's hospital system lockdown triggers, cutting off their access to medical billing systems they've been using to launder money. 11:40 p.m. The Singapore financial authorities move against their Asia-Pacific operations, which they thought were safely hidden behind a web of matrimonial property laws. 11:45 p.m. FBI tactical teams take position around 7 key locations. Not their public fronts, but their real operations centers. Rebecca stepped forward, and at midnight, when they're braced for a media blast, we trigger their own kill switch, Sarah finished. The one they built into every system they've compromised. The one Margaret so helpfully revealed when she took over my office, Agent Chen smiled grimly. They designed it to erase their tracks if they were ever exposed. Instead, it's going to lock them out of every system they've infiltrated. Dr. Wong checked her tablet. Teams are in position at every major hospital network. The minute the kill switch activates, we implement our new security protocols. They'll be locked out permanently. Same with the court systems, Judge Martinez added. Every judge in our network is ready. The minute their access drops, we seal every case file they've ever touched. Sarah looked around the room, seeing the same determined expression on every face. These women had spent decades fighting their way to the tops of their professions. Now they were bringing all that experience to a different kind of battle. Questions, she asked. Just one, Patricia replied. What about James and Margaret? Sarah's expression hardened. They'll be at their command center, the one they think we don't know about, the one in the Federal Reserve building where James is supposed to start work next week. That's where I come in, Agent Chen said. "My team is already in position. When their kill switch activates, they'll have exactly one escape route, and we'll be waiting." "And if something goes wrong?" Rebecca asked quietly. Sarah met her friend's eyes. "Then we move to Plan B, but trust me, they're not the only ones who know how to set a trap." She checked her watch again. 11:25 p.m. "Take your positions, ladies. At midnight, we show them what happens when they target the wrong women." As the team dispersed to their stations, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Margaret thought she'd infiltrated their network. She was about to learn that some networks ran deeper than others, and that hell hath no fury like professional women scorned. The body camera footage would later become crucial evidence in federal court. It showed Sarah, Rebecca, and Agent Chen moving through the darkened corridors of the Federal Reserve Building's secure floor, their steps silent against the marble floors. The timestamp read 11:55 p.m. "Security systems are looped," Agent Chen whispered, checking her tactical tablet. "They're seeing what we want them to see." 2 decades of FBI experience guided her movements as she led them toward the building's central monitoring room. Through their secure earpieces, they could hear the coordinated reports from their network. Judge Martinez, West Coast accounts locked and frozen. Dr. Wong, medical system firewalls activated. Patricia, court record segregation complete. Sarah checked her phone's encrypted display. The kill switch program was ready, waiting for her command. In 5 minutes, it would activate, triggering their trap. But first, they needed visual confirmation of their targets. They reached the security station outside the monitoring room. The guard's desk was empty, exactly as they'd expected. Margaret's people would have dismissed all regular personnel, replacing them with their own operatives. "Look at this," Rebecca whispered, gesturing to a schedule posted on the desk. "James Richardson Palmer, Level 4 clearance, scheduled to start Monday." They were really going to embed him here. "Not just him," Agent Chen replied, checking the roster. 3 more of their operatives were already in place. We've been tracking their applications through HR. Sarah's phone vibrated. A message from their surveillance team outside. "Multiple vehicles just pulled into the secure garage. Margaret's arriving with her response team. They think they're here to stop our media blast." They moved into position around the monitoring room's doors. Through the reinforced glass, they could see banks of screens showing security feeds from across the financial district. And there, in the center of it all, stood James. He looked exactly as he had in their wedding photos. Elegant suit, silver hair perfectly styled. But his expression was different now, cold and focused as he directed operations from a central console. "Target confirmed," Agent Chen whispered into her comm unit. "All teams stand by." Sarah's phone showed 11:58 p.m. Inside the monitoring room, they could see James receiving updates, probably from Margaret's team arriving below. His confidence was evident in every gesture. He thought he was winning. 60 seconds. Rebecca breathed. "Everyone ready?" Around the city, around the country, their network was poised. Judge Martinez's clerks hovering over court filing systems. Dr. Wong's IT team ready at hospital security stations. Patricia's judicial colleagues prepared to seal decades of compromised cases. 30 seconds, Sarah counted down. Through the glass, they watched James answer his phone, Margaret undoubtedly reporting that she'd secured Sarah's office and stopped their planned media exposure. 15 seconds. James was smiling now, saying something they couldn't hear through the thick glass. Behind him, the security feed showed Margaret and her team entering the building's lobby. 10 seconds. Sarah's finger hovered over the kill. Switch activation. 2 decades of legal battles had taught her to recognize the moment when victory was assured. This was that moment. 5. James turned toward the door, his expression changing as he finally spotted them through the glass. 4. His hands moved toward his console, but it was too late. 3. Margaret's voice crackled through his phone, warning him, but even she couldn't stop what was coming. 2. James lunged for the emergency shutdown, realizing too late that they'd never planned a media attack. One. Sarah pressed the button. Every screen in the monitoring room went black simultaneously. Then, one by one, they relit with a single message. System locked. Federal investigation in progress. James's face drained of color as he realized what was happening. Around the city, around the country, every system his organization had infiltrated was shutting down, locking them out with their own kill switch protocols. The doors burst open as Agent Chen's tactical team swarmed the room. James's hands raised slowly as Sarah and Rebecca entered behind them. "Hello, darling," Sarah said, her voice cold. "I believe we need to discuss some irregularities in our prenuptial agreement." Downstairs, they could hear the sounds of Margaret and her team being intercepted by FBI agents. Their entire command and control structure was being dismantled in real time. "You don't understand what you've done," James said, his polished charm cracking. "The people I work for—" "Oh, we understand perfectly," Rebecca interrupted. "That's why we're not just shutting down your operation here." She gestured to the screens, where reports were flooding in from their network. "Singapore, London, Dubai, your entire global infrastructure is being dismantled as we speak. Turns out professional women know how to network," Sarah added with grim satisfaction, "and we're very, very good at corporate takeovers." Agent Chen stepped forward with handcuffs. "James Richardson Palmer, though I doubt that's your real name, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. And those are just the federal charges. I believe these ladies have some state and civil complaints to add." As he was led away, Sarah turned to Rebecca. "Ready for phase 2? Rebecca nodded grimly. "Time to unravel every marriage license, every legal document, every financial arrangement they've ever created. And this time," Sarah added, watching James disappear into custody, "we're making sure they can never target another woman again." The court documents filled an entire wall of the federal courthouse's largest conference room. Hundreds of marriage licenses, financial contracts, and legal agreements, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of fraud they were now unraveling. Sarah stood before them, yellow sticky notes in hand, connecting patterns that stretched back decades. "His real name is James Kovach," Agent Chen said, entering with a fresh stack of files. "Former securities trader who disappeared after the 2008 financial crisis. Apparently he decided romance was more profitable than Wall Street." "And Margaret?" Rebecca asked, looking up from her laptop where she was tracking the ongoing financial cleanup. "Diana Evans, ex-military intelligence. She specialized in creating deep cover identities before going private sector." Agent Chen shook her head. "They weren't just con artists. They were professionals who found a way to exploit the one thing most security systems can't guard against. Trust," Sarah finished quietly. She picked up one of the marriage licenses, her own, and added it to the invalidated pile. The legal proceedings to void all of James's fraudulent marriages had taken less than a week, thanks to Judge Martinez's coordination of courts across multiple jurisdictions. Patricia entered, her judicial robes swishing as she carried her own contribution to their growing evidence wall. "We've identified 64 victims so far, not just the recent cases. Some of these go back 15 years. And those are just the ones we know about," Rebecca added. She pulled up a new spreadsheet. On the conference room's main screen, the financial tracking is staggering. They used each marriage as a legitimate front to move money through our institutions, banking, healthcare, legal systems, anywhere they could exploit spousal privileges for access. Sarah studied the numbers scrolling past. Total amount laundered, conservative. Estimate over $2 billion. Rebecca's fingers flew across her keyboard. "We're still finding accounts, shell companies, hidden transfers. Every time we think we've reached the bottom, there's another layer." Agent Chen finished. She laid out a series of surveillance photos showing James with various international figures. This wasn't just about romance scams. They were building a shadow financial network using legitimate marriages to create a web of seemingly valid transactions. That's why they targeted professional women, Patricia added. Each victim gave them access to different parts of the legitimate business world. Judges for legal cover, doctors for medical billing networks, bankers for financial systems, and lawyers for regulatory compliance, Sarah said grimly. She turned to a new section of their evidence wall where they'd mapped the organization's global structure. How many arrests so far? 43 key players across 12 countries, Agent Chen reported. James and Margaret, or Diana, were just the tip of the iceberg. We've got corrupt bank officials, compromised security, personnel, even a few government employees who helped facilitate the documentation. Rebecca's laptop chimed with a new alert. Singapore just seized another set of accounts. They're estimating another 100 million in laundered funds. And the victims? Sarah asked quietly. This part mattered most to her, ensuring that every woman targeted by this organization got justice. Patricia managed a small smile. The restitution process is already underway. Thanks to our network, we're not just recovering stolen funds. We're helping these women rebuild their professional reputations. More than that, Agent Chen added, their testimony is strengthening our cases. These aren't just victims, they're expert witnesses, professionals who can explain exactly how their credentials and positions were exploited. Sarah nodded, turning back to the evidence wall. And the security upgrades being implemented across all vulnerable systems, Rebecca confirmed. Dr. Wong's team has developed new protocols specifically designed to flag spousal privilege abuse. Judge Martinez is overseeing changes to court documentation requirements. My banking colleagues are revising joint account policies. We're not just shutting them down, Patricia said with satisfaction. We're making sure nothing like this can happen again. Agent Chen's phone buzzed. Another update from the ongoing investigation. Interpol just picked up 3 more members of their organization in Dubai. They're singing like canaries, apparently. Giving up everything about their training program, their recruitment methods. Their mistake, Sarah said, adding another red string to their evidence map, was thinking that professional women our age would be easy targets, that we'd be so grateful for romance, so eager for partnership, that we wouldn't look too closely at the details. Instead, Rebecca added with a grim smile, they gave us common cause, a reason to combine our expertise, our resources, our connections, and create something stronger than their network, Patricia finished. Sarah stepped back, surveying their work. The evidence wall told a story not just of crime and deception, but of resilience and collaboration, of professional women turning their years of experience toward a different kind of justice. Speaking of networks, Agent Chen said, checking her watch. It's time for the daily conference call. 23 more victims have come forward since yesterday, each one bringing new evidence, new connections, and new allies, Sarah added, moving toward the secure conference room. The organization had tried to exploit professional women's expertise. Instead, they'd helped create a powerful force for justice, one that was still growing, still connecting, still working to protect others from similar schemes. The war wasn't over, but the tide had definitively turned, and Sarah couldn't help but think that somewhere James was realizing just how badly he'd underestimated the women he'd tried to deceive. The thank you notes sat on Sarah's new desk, a stack of elegant cards jointly signed by her and Rebecca. 1 year had passed since the night they'd taken down James's organization, and the messages inside reflected how much had changed. Your courage helped us recover not just our assets, but our dignity. Thank you for showing us we weren't alone. Your network of professional women has become a beacon of hope. Sarah picked up one of the cards, studying the embossed logo of the Professional Women's Security Alliance, the organization that had grown from their original network of victims. What had started as 37 women helping each other heal had evolved into a powerful force for change, with chapters in every major city. "Ready for the conference?" Rebecca asked, entering Sarah's office. They'd moved their practices into the same building 6 months ago, combining their legal and financial expertise to help other women protect themselves from similar schemes. "Just finished the keynote," Sarah replied, gesturing to her laptop. The title slide read, "Trust but Verify, Professional Women's Guide to Personal and Financial Security." Rebecca smiled, remembering how far they'd come. "Hard to believe it's been a year. Judge Martinez called this morning. James's appeals were denied. He and Margaret will be serving their full sentences. And the organization? Dismantled. Dr. Wong's new security protocols have been adopted by hospital systems nationwide. Patricia's judicial reforms are changing how courts handle marriage-related financial fraud. Agent Chen says they haven't seen a single case of spousal privilege abuse since our security upgrades went live." Sarah stood, moving to her window. The view was different now, not just because of the new office, but because she saw the world differently. "You know what James said at his sentencing? That they targeted professional women because we were supposedly easier to deceive, too focused on our careers to see through romantic deception. Instead, they discovered that career focus meant we knew exactly how to fight back," Rebecca finished. She joined Sarah at the window. "Have you seen the latest membership numbers? Over 5,000 women have joined the Alliance, not just victims, professionals who want to help protect others." Sarah nodded. The Alliance had become more than a support network. It was a think tank, a security consulting firm, and an advocacy group all in one. "Catherine says our waiting list for speaking engagements is booked through next year. Apparently everybody wants to hear how a group of middle-aged professional women took down an international criminal enterprise." "Speaking of which," Rebecca checked her watch, "the first attendees will be arriving soon, 300 women coming to learn from our experience." Sarah gathered her presentation materials, including the thank you notes. They'd become part of her standard talk, a reminder that healing came not just from justice, but from helping others. "You know what the best revenge is?" she asked as they headed for the conference room. "What's that?" Turning their weapon against them. "They tried to use professional women's expertise to build a criminal empire. Instead, we used that same expertise to create something powerful, something good." The conference room was filling up as they arrived. Sarah saw familiar faces: Patricia, Dr. Wong, Agent Chen, mixed with new ones. Each woman represented a different profession, a different strength, a different perspective. "Ready?" Rebecca asked quietly. Sarah smiled, stepping up to the podium. She was more than ready. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. "Welcome, ladies," she began. "Let me tell you a story about how underestimating professional women turned out to be the biggest mistake an international criminal organization ever made."